August 31st. The Kursk nuclear power plant is under attack.
Holy shit, guys. Now that's a good morning, huh?
Russia blew up the transformer in Kurchatov itself. A provocation to blame Ukraine. Everything is on fire. Moscow and Saint Petersburg are in a panic. At the same time, there are strikes by the Ukrainian armed forces on Moscow and Saint Petersburg. Explosions are rocking the Leningrad region. Railway junctions have been blown up. The Syzran oil refinery is on fire.
Something's shooting over there, damn it. The sound of an alarm. That's it, it started.
That's it.
Ust-Luga is in flames. The major international airports located in Moscow and Saint Petersburg are currently experiencing significant paralysis. In Crimea, trains carrying military equipment have been blown up. We'll discuss all of this with top analyst Alexander Demchenko right now.
Looks like we're about to get kicked off the construction site. That's it. Those tanks have caught fire too. Hope I don't screw up now.
Breaking news, friends. Today, the skies over Russia have lit up with new explosions. Moscow, Saint Petersburg, explosions. They are paralyzed. Sheremetyevo, Vnukovo, and Pulkovo airports have halted operations because explosions are going off everywhere. There are fires in the Kaluga region. The Syzran oil refinery is burning. The strategic port of Ust-Luga has been attacked, and the Novatek gas terminal has simply been blown up. The Kremlin's energy empire is collapsing right before our eyes.
I don't think wandering around the terminal is a great idea either. Some random shell could hit any moment now.
Important facilities, oil refineries have been attacked. Novoshaktinsk has been burning for 3 days straight. Everyone there is sobbing and crying. Gas terminals, factories, and railway junctions have been attacked. An aviation collapse in Moscow and Saint Petersburg. Panic. Airports have been shut down. Let's discuss all this with the well-known top analyst Alexander Demchenko. Sasha, welcome.
Hello, Dasha. Hello, everyone. All right, Dasha, let's get started.
Yes, friends. Write a few kind words in support of Ukraine in the comments. Glory to the armed forces of Ukraine. And we begin with the explosions. It's been a while since anything hit Moscow or St. Petersburg, so there's panic in St. Petersburg. Airports have been shut down. The largest gas processing complex in Europe is burning in Ust-Luga. Now, it will be difficult for the Kremlin not only to wage war, but also to trade fuel. Sasha, how do you assess today's strikes?
This is really a blow, right in the gut. Ukraine continues to destroy the energy sector of the Russian Federation. We're not just talking about some gas terminal or the Novatek station. Yes, the terminal has been destroyed. Listen, an enterprise has been destroyed, an asset belonging to Gennady Timchenko. Let's call things by their proper names. Gennady Timchenko is the oligarch closest to Putin, who sponsors Putin, builds him individual factories, ships, and even palaces in Gelendzhik together with the Rotenbergs. Gennady Timchenko is Putin's closest friend in hockey and everything else, and now a direct blow has already been dealt. In other words, they are striking at Putin, at his inner circle, at his oligarchs. Not at some imaginary figures, not at some oligarchs who were once close to Putin, but today the blow was dealt directly to Putin's closest circle. Next. We also must not forget, as I read, that a transformer near the Kursk nuclear power plant has been damaged. So these are not just strikes on the energy sector. What did Putin recently say through the mouth of Alexander Lukashenko, right? With his mouthpiece. That Russia was preparing Putin's strikes, basically urging to hit Vnukovo with Oreshnik. Did that happen? It did. Did he say that a couple of days ago? Lukashenko said that a couple of days ago. It's a kind of blackmail, We can go all the way. We can escalate, we can go all in. That's what the Kremlin was saying through Lukashenko. Well, there you go. You're blackmailing with nuclear fallout. You're constantly provoking incidents at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Here you are. But I am more than sure, Dash, that in fact it was not even Ukraine that struck the Kursk nuclear power plant, that it was Putin once again, his troops, his army, just as they did with regard to the airports that you asked about, right? We will not forget. Vnukovo. Hit. Missile strike. Shoots down a Ukrainian drone, an anti-missile. It practically falls on people. The Ukrainian drone, shot down by a Russian anti-missile, falls just 200 meters from the terminal. It's the same now. They bombed the entire Kursk region with their guided aerial bombs from the air. I mean, the Russian army, the armed forces, the air force. Did they bomb? They did. Did they wipe the Kursk region off the face of the earth? Did they wipe it out? They did. Are they still wiping out the Kursk region because they can't completely drive out the Ukrainian soldier? They keep wiping the Kursk region to dust, destroying their own people. And a Russian missile hit the nuclear power plant. Putin is striking. There's only one question. Is this because of incompetence, or is it because someone wants to stage a nuclear provocation, blame everything on Ukraine, carry out the biggest possible terrorist attack, stir up Trump, and tell him, look at what's happening, here are our energy facilities, here are our nuclear sites. What negotiations? Maybe this is partly a plan to disrupt negotiations with Ukraine, negotiations that Putin never intended to enter into and still doesn't.
Yes, that's absolutely right. In reality, they're the ones striking the Kursk nuclear power plant, deliberately creating a precedent to make it look like Ukraine carried out the attack. This has already been reported, including by the Center for Countering Disinformation, that this is the work of the Russians. They strike themselves and then they accuse Ukraine themselves. Well, now let's talk about where we are striking. Sasha, I saw that Magyar has prepared a whole list for Independence Day about why, and this is actually really important lately. We've been striking oil refineries. Almost all of them in the European part of Russia have been attacked. And so Magyar made a statement. The former Medvedchuk-owned oil refinery in Novoshaktinsk has been burning for over 60 hours. Over 60 hours, Carl. Next, on August 14th, we hit Lukoil, the Volgograd oil refinery, and then Druzhba. The Hungarians say that the restoration or the repair will take 5 days. There is no confirmation of it being restarted. Magyar writes, on August 20th, the Novoshaktinsk oil refinery, then Druzhba, then this is called the Magyar refinery. We're blowing everything up. Go home, Russians. That's what Magyar reports. Well, and now, as I understand it, today we attacked, among others, the Syzran oil refinery and the Ust-Luga port at the same time. Sasha, lately we've been hitting the refineries very intensively. What do you think is the reason for this? Because for a while, this wasn't happening.
Rostov, Saratov, Ryazan. You just have to keep adding to it. It's a huge list that comes to mind right now of oil refineries and stations that Ukraine, its armed forces, and its special services are destroying or significantly damaging. Let's not forget that just the SBU under Vasil Malyuk has taken out more than 200 Russian energy, and not only energy facilities, but also defense-related ones. And other intelligence agencies, both military and foreign, have also made a tremendous contribution to this effort. But what does this tell us? Look, right now on the streets, on the roads of Russia, there are huge lines everywhere. Trucks are lined up, cars, passenger vehicles are standing still. Everyone is looking for gasoline. In 3 regions of Russia, this is not counting the occupied Ukrainian Crimea, although there's an energy crisis there too. The fuel crisis has already reached the Kuril Islands. And I was sitting there, since April I've been telling everyone, look, there will soon be an energy catastrophe in Russia, there will be a fuel crisis, get ready, start collecting, gather up some plastic bottles, gather all those metal cans so you can store gasoline. Well, now it's by ration cards. They're giving out 10 liters per person. And what are 10 liters for a truck? That's nothing. That's just enough to drive a little and then stop again until the next gas station if you're lucky. That's why there's a fuel crisis in Russia right now. So what did Ukraine do? Ukraine deliberately started striking energy facilities. Putin isn't observing any kind of moratorium. Ukraine started hitting energy facilities successfully. The oil refineries have shut down. Friends, for those who don't understand, I'm just explaining what this means. So look, everyone is used to thinking that the Russian oil sector, or let's say the energy sector, is all about profits from selling gas and oil. Friends, look, what is a gas station? What is a filling station? A filling station, let me explain to you. 60% of the price when you buy a liter of gasoline, 60% of that is excise tax. It's a tax. Now imagine if none of that tax is being collected. That 3 regions are already not paying taxes. That all of this is collapsing. The Russian Federation is facing major economic problems. Putin has big problems. He doesn't have money for the war. And Ukraine is doing everything to make him exhaust his last reserves and finally go to those damn negotiations with Zelensky. But this time, to real negotiations. Flexible negotiations, talks without ultimatums, without threats, without blackmail, and without those stinking manipulations from Anchorage up to today. Just normal business-like negotiations about the future. And not about the future of Ukraine, but about the future of the entire region. Because Ukraine has struck Russian energy facilities. Because Ukraine, which is defending its own territory, where Russia has advanced over the past years by just 1% of all possible territory, as President Zelensky mentioned today. Because Ukraine, which over the past year or year and a half has developed the Flamingo missile, the Sarmat missile, the long-range Neptune, the regular Neptune, completely upends the board and shows both the Kremlin, Putin, and his entire entourage, all his well-fed oligarchs who funnel him money every single time to him and his family for their existence, for power, for life. Look, guys, we can do it this way too. Without American help, we can do it on our own. We can do it ourselves. We can strike like this too. And they will strike. First with drones and soon with missiles as well. And this isn't because I'm calling for anything. It's just a fact. It's a fact. Ukraine has developed, Ukraine has tested, Ukraine is already striking. Ukraine has the strongest drone story, and Ukraine will have the strongest missile story, with American help or without American help. And what are they all going to do about it? That's a big question for Russia. And Putin will have to answer that question in the near future. He won't answer, but things will get tougher, because gifts like today, Dasha, these gifts will happen more and more often, every month, again and again. It won't just be Russia striking Ukraine. Ukraine will certainly respond, because we are all just thoroughly and completely fed up with what Vladimir Putin and his aggressive troops are doing in their ongoing invasion.
Sasha, I really like the situation with the series of strikes on Druzhba at Necha. In this way, we are systematically destroying the Druzhba oil pipeline, which today supplies oil to two of our adversaries, Slovakia and Hungary, who are blocking, especially Hungary, Ukraine's accession to the European Union. And as for Orban, the Russian one, I won't even comment. I really liked how Peter Syzran, I think it was yesterday, wrote a post like, how is it even possible that Ukraine is attacking the Druzhba oil pipeline? How dare they? To which all the European leaders, well, many of them replied, well, you show solidarity with the European Union to the same extent that we are showing solidarity with you. When I think the Ukrainian ambassador to South Africa wrote that solidarity and Hungary are like goulash and vegetarianism. So basically, they totally trolled the Hungarians. What do you think about our strikes on the Druzhba oil pipeline?
Look, it's clear that Orban is furious. Orban is furious because he gets a huge share. I think about 10% of all Russian oil goes to Viktor Orban. He's basically sitting on the pipeline making money from the transit, just like many others used to. Yanukovych sat on the pipeline. A lot of people here did too, remember? Medvedchuk and so on. Orban is sitting on Hungary's pipeline. There you go. They get a huge percentage. Orban. Well, as people say, whether it's true or just a rumor, we don't know. There are no documents in hand. No one has seen them. No one has held them, so to speak. Maybe just a few select people. Orban, as people say, was recruited by the Russian, or rather the Soviet KGB back in the late 80s. That's why he's been on their payroll for a long time. He's been, excuse the expression, feeding off Putin, the FSB, and Lubyanka for years. So everything is clear here. Yes, Ukraine is striking at a friendship that is becoming more and more unfriendly by the day, right? But if the issue is Russian transit, and if the problem is that Hungary and Slovakia, especially Hungary, cannot accept, coordinate, or agree to anti-Russian measures and sanctions, and this is solely because Russia supplies oil to Hungary, well then let's just take that bubble off the table. If it's all about the oil, well fine, then let's remove the oil. Then will you let Ukraine into the European Union? Then will you give Ukraine all the weapons it needs? Then will you impose sanctions against the Russian Federation? Or is it not about the oil at all, but rather about the document you signed, Viktor Orban, many, many decades ago, when you agreed to become an agent or collaborator of the Soviet KGB? What is the real problem here? Or is it that Hungary, and specifically Orban's government, supports its entire entourage and apparatus with Russian, Putin's money, with money from Putin's oligarchs, and thus lives a normal, good, happy life? And by the way, they are actively stirring up the Ukrainian Transcarpathia region, for which Orban has had his own particular plans for a long time, and who, behind Ukraine's back, secretly negotiated with Putin at the start of the invasion about carving up the Ukrainian state. Or have we forgotten about that? Or have we forgotten the letters from the State Duma of the Russian Federation back in 2014, including those sent to Hungary, where there was an official proposal to divide Ukraine into several parts? Have we forgotten that? You know what I like, Dasha, about all of this, about this whole situation with Orban? I like Trump's reaction, as strange as it may sound. Trump wrote, he printed out that tweet. Was it a letter or some kind of printed message, or was it a tweet? Who knows exactly what that particular message was from Orban, but Donald Trump himself wrote on it, almost like a personal note. I am very angry, you know, that kind of sentiment. I'm very angry. I just can't stand listening to all this. Tell the Slovaks that I'm their friend. What was Trump's reaction after that? None. Did he call Zelensky? Did he pass anything on to Ukraine? Did the State Department issue any kind of note? So did he start blackmailing Ukraine live on air or making some kind of threats? No. Trump did nothing. Just as, by the way, he also did nothing about the destroyed American, or rather damaged American electronics company Flex's plant in Mukachevo, which was hit by Putin. What about the security guarantees, Donald? Wherever there is an American investor, wherever there is an American factory, Putin won't strike. Well, he did strike. Once again, because, let's be honest, since 2014, Putin has repeatedly struck American factories, and he's hit Polish factories too, a NATO member country. Poland doesn't really like to respond either, right? Now, drones are flying 100 kilometers from Warsaw. And Poland, you know, they have these really, what do they call it? What do they say? Oh my, tell me, Dasha. They have a lot of concern, you know? Deep concern. They are deeply dismayed and concerned about what happened. And Trump is deeply concerned too. Nothing is happening. But the key thing I want to say is this. Apparently, Ukraine, Zelensky, decided to take matters into their own hands. We probably all heard those Wall Street Journal statements today. We don't know if it's true or not. Listen, American publications are playing their own game too. They are also divided into certain factions, into certain kinds of clans. There are certain money bags behind them. They have their own story there. But the Wall Street Journal published a very interesting piece today where they reported that, yes, on the one hand, Ukraine is receiving over 800 short-range missiles with a range of up to 400 kilometers. But on the other hand, Donald Trump and the Department of Defense itself, the same official who recently blocked the delivery of weapons, shells, missiles, and so on to Ukraine, as you may recall, then they had to urgently unblock it in emergency mode. So just today, we found out that, as it turns out, America, the Trump administration, and the Pentagon blocked Ukraine from striking deep into Russia with ATAC-MS missiles and the British-French Storm Shadow missiles because their use is directly regulated and coordinated by US space intelligence. Space intelligence stops transmitting coordinates. Accordingly, Ukraine and Zelensky have probably finally realized and understood that, you can't do business with this partner at all. All of this is a futile effort. You have to rely on yourself, just like Israel does and like many, many other countries and states. For this reason, missile programs are being developed successfully. I'm sure Ukraine already has at least 10 other missile prototypes, and soon we'll hear about them. Even now, there are significant strikes being carried out against Putin's closest circle. Even now, we are completely undermining the situation inside the Russian Federation from within, isn't that right? Because all these strikes have a direct impact on the political segment, on the political situation, on public sentiment, on Russia's economy, and on the social situation because it's the ordinary people who suffer. They're the ones buying gasoline and fuel at gas stations, while the Russian army gets it from Putin, and all of Putin's Oruses are fueled up just as needed. It's the ordinary people who suffer. That's why everything is happening just as it was basically planned. Everything is going according to plan. Everything is absolutely logical. And to be honest, these are good news for August 24, 2025. There haven't been good news for a long time. At last, we've finally heard something positive.
Sashki, it's really important to me. Well, we all remember when there was the Navy Day parade in St. Petersburg. What a mind-blowing...
Oh, yeah. You call that a parade?
Well, that was trolling, of course. A festive one. So there was this kind of explosion in the territory of Petersburg and the Leningrad region thanks to our drones. And now they've attacked again, targeting a place that's magical for Putin, Petersburg, and the Leningrad region, Ust-Luga. Don't you think this is symbolic, right? Because for Putin, Petersburg is a sacred city, and today Pulkovo is closed, the Saint Petersburg airport, and there are drones flying around there. I checked this morning before our stream, and a couple of drones, because of Russian electronic warfare, ended up flying into apartments in Petersburg, Sasha.
Well, look, this is a very clear and undeniable signal that the operational range is already quite good and highly effective. If earlier Ukraine could only reach its own occupied territories at the very start of the war, and then subsequently the immediate border regions of the Russian Federation, and we certainly observed that for a considerable period of time. Then there were isolated strikes, long-range ones, sort of trial balloons aimed at Tatarstan. You saw that. But after there were already special operations on the territory of Siberia, after Ukraine started striking, well, already reaching such distant regions as Irkutsk Oblast, you see, for example, and so on. It reaches beyond the Urals, it reaches up to the Urals. So we're talking about the fact that, yes, Ukraine is signaling to Moscow that the range has changed and that Ukraine is acquiring the capabilities and means to destroy any target, no matter how well protected it is, no matter what kind of rock these mega bunkers are hidden in on Russian territory. You know, Dasha, there's one very interesting detail I'd like to discuss, because missile strikes are one thing, but you can't talk about them for the entire broadcast. Look, right now, some very interesting things are happening in Russia. Just really interesting things. A decision was made in the Kremlin. I'm absolutely serious. I'm not trolling right now. I mean this sincerely. A decision was made in the Kremlin that the Russian police are not coping and will not be able to cope directly with the veterans of the so-called special military operation. And that order in local areas, in cities, and in the regions of Russia should in part be maintained by the Russian army, since it directly oversees and coordinates all these scoundrels who took up guns for money and went to kill Ukrainian civilians and military personnel. Accordingly, the question arises, if they are planning to hand this over to the army, and if the army will be the one maintaining order on the streets of Russian cities, does this mean first that Putin will bring troops into Moscow and Saint Petersburg? First. Second, Does this mean that over time the Russian army will gain and continue to gain more and more power in Russia, and that the generals will become gluttonous with power? Is this, a kind of safety cushion in case we end the war or freeze it or stop it, right? In one form or another. But at the same time, you keep getting money because the army is being used on the streets of Russian cities and regions. So does this mean that the generals will become even more influential in every way? Third, does this mean that there will be an inevitable war between the FSB and the military generals? And will it actually happen? Fourth, does this basically mean that, well, we will gradually see a military coup or attempts at a military coup in Russia, Moscow, the Kremlin, Putin? Will this be carried out? Because, you see, there have already been times in Russian history, in the history of the Soviet Union, in the history of Moscow, when the generals removed an unwanted general secretary. This has happened before. Or more precisely, not even a general secretary, but someone who very much wanted to become one. Let me remind you of the story of Daria and Zhukov. Isn't that right? How did Khrushchev come to power? How did the rest of the trio come to power? Zhukov came in and restored order, and Beria was eliminated. So all of this is inevitable. And if this is happening, it means it's not just an attempt by Putin to preserve certain channels for the generals. This is truly a major concern for the Kremlin, for Putin, and for his inner circle, that a huge number of people will get their hands on weapons, that the regions will thus become isolated from Russia, that there will be a massive redistribution of property in the Russian Federation, that not just the 90s will return, but God knows what years will come back, that there will be major coups, major uprisings, major armed rebellions. And Putin will not be able to cope with all of this. He needs the army, but there is also the threat that this very army could overthrow Putin in the coming years, as soon as he stops the war. These are indeed the crucial questions that truly need to be carefully considered and thoroughly analyzed right now, at this very moment. So what's already happening here? Look, Kinstein has appeared. Kinstein has shown up. Is he the acting governor in Rio, or is he already the governor?
Yes.
Yes, he is already the governor of the Kursk region. The attacks on the Kursk nuclear power plant are a threat to nuclear safety and cross all boundaries of international conventions.
Oh.
In short, they are disrupting the negotiations. Yes. They didn't know how to get out of all this mess. From Trump's proposal to hold one-on-one negotiations between Zelensky and Putin, they didn't know how to make sure Putin wouldn't go anywhere. They couldn't figure out how to create a situation where Trump would get angry at Ukraine and bypass the Europeans. They just didn't know how to knock out all these Trump cards. Well, they decided to go all in. Their last Trump card is a nuclear catastrophe, a nuclear threat. This way, you see, they can reject Trump, prolong the pause, keep pretending, continue negotiations with the Americans, squeeze more concessions out of the Americans, and at the same time threaten Ukraine with nuclear weapons and everything else. Now, they will start deploying weapons on the territory of Belarus. There's more, Dash. So, look, we can see how Putin is now disrupting the negotiations. This is a breakdown of the negotiations. I'm telling you, this is a breakdown of the negotiations. That's it. The Kursk nuclear power plant. This is a breakdown of the negotiations. That's what he needed. And notice, they're doing this in Kursk. They're not doing this in other regions of Russia, are they? They're doing it in Kursk, where they don't care anymore.
And now, here's video evidence that everything Kinstein said is a lie. Let's watch.
Good morning. I want to reassure you, everything is fine in Kurchatov. Everything is calm. There is no fire at the moment. Well, there was some noise at night. Something popped, flared up, but they put it out quickly. At the moment, everything is safe. Birds are flying. The weather is gorgeous, sunny. Peace and kindness to everyone.
The Rashist himself confirmed that something happened there, as you heard, using absolutely inappropriate language. I won't even repeat it. So, Sasha, what is this?
It's a provocation. It's the same as those tires at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant that they set on fire, let me remind you. It's the same kind of story. In other words, they provoked something minor so as not to make too much noise, to avoid an explosion, to avoid repeating Chernobyl, which, by the way, they themselves caused here on Ukrainian territory once and then kept silent about that disaster for a huge number of days, simply concealing it. So this is a provocation, not an attempt. It's a disruption of negotiations. Listen, these are just obvious things. They staged the provocation themselves, carried it out themselves, talked about it themselves. And then they'll tell Trump that this is what happened and that they can't tolerate it anymore. There will be no negotiations. Everything is ruined and Ukraine is to blame for everything. They're doing all this because, well, they have no room to maneuver. They either need to go to the negotiating table or not. If you don't go, there will be some consequences. You need to make sure there are no consequences. You need to give Trump absolutely accurate information. How can that be done? So that Trump comes out with some kind of angry tweet. By the way, I wouldn't be surprised if he does come out with an angry tweet. But Dasha, what's the most important thing? What's the key point here? The most important thing is this. No matter how hard all these Russian security officials try, no matter what they do, Putin has a huge pile of problems and he cannot wage this war forever. Putin doesn't have the money for this war. He is becoming extremely dependent on many other players, to the point where, even catastrophically, he is now more dependent on North Korea than on the Russian defense industry. He can no longer wage a war of this intensity and he needs to bring it to an end. If he thinks that in the few months he has left, he can somehow win this war or turn the situation in his favor, he is gravely mistaken, because his generals are traitors. Gerasimov betrayed him a long time ago. He gives him completely inaccurate, unnecessary information, absolutely false information. There is nothing there, no such colossal advance. 1% over all these years. 1. Yes. And the American Institute for the Study of War states the following, that it would take Putin and his army 99 years, even at the current accelerated pace, to take all of Ukraine. Putin won't live that long, that's clear to everyone. And I think that even the subsequent general secretaries, or whoever else comes after Putin or alongside him in Russia, won't live long enough to fulfill or realize all these pipe dreams of theirs. So, they're deliberately provoking a strike. This has happened before. It happened at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. They made a mess at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant when they started this whole bloody mess called the full-scale invasion. They have already staged provocations in the Kursk region near the Kursk nuclear power plant. All of this has happened before. But now there is a specific target. The goal is simple: to get Trump out of Ukraine, to finish what they started, the so-called special operation, and moreover, to squeeze some extra perks out of the Americans and make sure that the idea of a meeting between Putin and Zelensky never crosses Trump's mind. That's the only thing they want. They don't need anything else.
Yes, Sasha, that's true. That's their strategy. Because yesterday, on the eve of Ukraine's Independence Day, Trump made a statement saying that in 2 weeks he will either impose sanctions and tariffs, he used both of those terms, or he will walk away and say, "This is not my war." And most likely, Putin is counting on the second option from Trump. Sasha, so I definitely wanted to ask about Putin. I have one question about that for the end. But now I want to talk about logistics, the paralysis of the skies and the railway hubs, and how much all of this is affecting the Russians. Right now, everyone is reporting that the shutdown of Pulkovo, Sheremetyevo, and Vnukovo airports due to drones is a new standard of risk for Russia. Next, the railway hubs and stations. So right now, we've basically created a complete railway collapse and paralysis. For example, yesterday, for 2 days straight, the Russians couldn't buy tickets. They were crowding at railway hubs. They couldn't do anything. In your opinion, realistically and without exaggeration, how much do strikes deep in the rear, Moscow, Saint Petersburg, air traffic collapses, railway collapses, demoralize the elites and the population? And how could this actually affect Putin and either speed up the negotiation agenda for the Kremlin or, on the contrary, slow it down?
The elites are not demoralized. We shouldn't harbor any illusions here for one simple reason. The elite, the real elite, have their own business jets. Granted, there are some fuel issues, but there's enough fuel for this elite. They have business jets. This is extremely demoralizing for the Russian people, the average Russian who votes for Putin and is told that everything is fine, that all is calm in Baghdad, that the war hasn't come to Moscow. It came a long time ago to both Moscow and Saint Petersburg. Look, Dasha, all of Russia is Moscow-centric, completely Moscow-centric. You must have noticed that those lines for gasoline on the highways stretch from Moscow through Rostov and Krasnodar. Everything goes through Moscow. All the supplies go through Moscow. The entire railway system is centered in Moscow. All air transportation, both civil and commercial, is centered in Moscow. Everything is focused on Moscow. If you destroy the hub or hubs that connect the most important nodes to Moscow, that's it. There's nothing left. The passenger transportation and food supply collapse begins there. A trade collapse starts there, an economic collapse, and so on. And in addition, it should be noted that every such attack and destruction of a particular railway line, or the shutdown, the stoppage of any airport in Moscow, in St. Petersburg, or anywhere else, means only one thing: that Russia loses huge amounts of money every day. Russia loses tens and tens of billions in just 1 hour, in a single hour. And Putin has no money. His national wealth fund is practically gone. All his reserves are in Chinese yuan. But there's another point, Dasha. There's a huge problem there. It's clear that oil and rubles aren't working. They're not working. The oil sector has dropped by 30%. That's an obvious fact. But there's another important and significant detail. The point is that if Putin doesn't have money, he'll be forced to get that money from somewhere. The only option he has to get this money is to go and fleece his more or less well-off population, the middle class and above, who have 40 trillion rubles sitting in Russian banks. And for this reason, over the past week, Russians suddenly withdrew 500 billion rubles from banks in just 1 week. $500 billion was taken by Russians from Vladimir Putin. Yes, I mean, this is a huge story, absolutely. $500 billion, $500 billion. In other words, we're talking about the fact that Russians felt the country was in deep trouble, that Putin is going to trick them, that Putin will deceive them, that Putin will simply take and seize their investments, their money, their savings, because he needs war, he needs to fight, he needs power, and to extend his rule through war. He dreams about it, he fantasizes about it, and accordingly now he will do everything possible to get that money. Who will give him the money? No one except the Russians themselves. Do Russians want to give their money to Vladimir Putin? No. That's why those who are smarter are already taking theirs out. And whoever is foolish will leave it until the very last moment and everything will burn. Putin will take everything, all the deposits, or let's say freeze them and never give them back. This is a very important point. This is more important than all the airports and all the railways. Because for the first time, Russians have felt that the war hasn't just arrived, but that it's time to take their money, pack their bags and get the hell out, or sit on those suitcases and wait for the right moment.
Yes, this is simply a formal campaign to wear down Russia's energy, economy, and logistics. Sasha, I can't help but ask you a question that our subscribers asked me to pass on. They love our tandem, Dasha plus Sasha, Sasha plus Dasha, and they specifically asked me to ask this question on Independence Day. How realistic do you think the scenario is? Do you remember that movie about Osama bin Laden? Target number 1? And everyone is discussing how realistic it is because the war could end quickly if target number 1 simply ceased to exist. In your opinion, how realistic is this scenario for intelligence agencies or not? Or is it just a utopia?
No, look, for intelligence agencies, everything is realistic for good intelligence agencies. Ukrainian intelligence agencies are good. For the Americans, it's a very realistic scenario. The issue here isn't about the intelligence agencies. If the intelligence agencies were given the task, they would try to carry it out. That's not the point. Moreover, there have been assassination attempts on Putin. There have been assassination attempts on Putin. And there has been more than one attempt on Vladimir Putin. And this has been mentioned in the Kremlin as well. The issue is something else entirely, Dasha. The issue is what I think. First, no one truly wants this kind of unfortunate precedent to ever appear or be established anywhere in the entire world. It's not about something like this happening specifically in Russia. The point is that this makes both the West and the East very uneasy. No one wants something like this to happen because a lot of people have skeletons in their closets, so they're all wary. But there's another point, a more serious one. Look, it seems to me that there is a person who is very much against these kinds of scenarios and who will defend Putin to the very end. And it's not that he likes him unconditionally. It's not about this person wanting negotiations with Putin or anything like that. It's just that he is focused on engaging with Russia, and specifically with Putin. And that person is Donald Trump. And there's nothing you can do about it and nothing you can negotiate with this Trump, at least for the next 3.5 years or so. But what would I like to say? You know, while we're thoroughly discussing all these important things, Vladimir Putin himself, as far as I understand, is actively planning a significant attack on a new country, a sovereign new state. Moreover, logic clearly tells me that an attack or an attempted attack is being planned against the leader of that particular country. And that is by no means Volodymyr Zelensky. Although Putin has tried, and I'm sure is still trying to somehow eliminate our president as well, he won't succeed. I'm talking about Azerbaijan and Ilham Aliyev. Ilham Aliyev recently made a statement that war is coming soon and that people need to prepare for it. And the only hope lies with the Azerbaijani people. In Baku, they understood perfectly well that as soon as they turned toward the United States, turned away from Russia, and allowed Trump and America to address the security issue in the South Caucasus, Putin would do everything possible first to destroy Armenia, to once again install his own pro-Kremlin government there. And second, to destroy Aliyev and Azerbaijan. But in that case, the Kremlin will have to face the Turkish army. But this confrontation is inevitable because Turkey and Russia have fought each other more than Russia has fought with anyone else. That's why I believe that in the near future, we will see a major confrontation, a prolonged large-scale war in the South Caucasus instigated by Russia. We can already see that in Armenia, where the 102nd Gyumri base, the Russian military base, is located, there have been protests, and Armenians are trying to kick the Russians out of Gyumri, out of Armenia. That's another flashpoint. So right now, even if the war stops or is frozen or whatever happens, although I don't believe in that, but many people are actually voicing exactly this scenario. Russia against Ukraine. Putin, having freed up enormous resources, would immediately turn his attention to the South Caucasus. That means Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. And I hope, I'm even sure, firstly, that Turkey won't allow it, that there would be a long drawn-out war and a clash with Turkish forces. And secondly, that the Americans won't let Vladimir Putin do this either. But the fact that this scenario, in my view, is inevitable and that it needs to be considered, that's a fact. That's something I would watch very closely, very diligently.
And right now, as you're saying this, there are protests taking place in Armenia against Russian military bases on the country's territory. Friends, to wrap up, we are attacking right now. As all the Telegram channels are already reporting, there is a massive drone attack underway on Russia. Oil refineries in Syzran have been hit. Explosions are occurring in all regions of the Moscow suburbs. Leningrad region, Syzran, Belgorod, Kursk region, Kurchatov, Tver, Leningrad, Smolensk, and Bryansk. We are acting precisely, selectively, and are indeed targeting only military facilities. Friends, please like this video. Sasha, the final word is yours to close out our stream today.
Friends, I just want to wish all of us endurance, patience, and to do just one thing, to truly get through this, survive, and keep on living. Because that will be, the scariest gift to Vladimir Putin from all of Ukraine, from each of us, right? To live a normal life right after, and to outlive Vladimir Putin and his regime. I wish this for all of you. Truth.
Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes.